expectations year to year differ. So if we want to have strong classroom management, we have to not only define our expectations, but we have to teach them. And they have to be explicitly taught because kids don't automatically know. You assume that they should know by now, but they don't know if they haven't been taught.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to School After Hours podcast, where we talk about all things related to out of school time programming and education. I am your host, Jay Lee, and we have the wonderful Carol Miller here with us today. She is an educational counselor. She has her own TPT store, giving you products and essentials for counseling, which are really good. I would stress that you go check them out. Definitely look at the things that's there because they are definitely going to help you. But also, she is a fellow podcaster as well for Counseling Chat. So, with that being said, Carol, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Hi, everyone. So good to be
Awesome.
here.
I'm happy to have you here. So, we are going to be talking about today managing behaviors in the classroom, okay? And I know this is a really, really deep topic coming back into the school year after a long break and even winding down. You know, some of us are getting ready for our summer planning at the same time. So, trying to get to the long stretch, trying to get to the next break. But with that being said, let's go ahead and take a pause and jump into our Community Corner. Community Corner is a segment of the show that allows guests or myself to share tips, advice, or information on a specific topic with young people, families, or community members. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our Community Corner conversation. All right, everybody, we've made it to our Community Corner. So, Carol, my question for you for Community Corner is this. When we come in contact with students with a variety of backgrounds, you know, we have students from different countries, we have students that speak different languages. We also have students that may have certain disabilities as well. And then we may have some of those students that are just kind of shy and reserved at the same time, right? So a lot of things going on. How do we get students to respect each other's differences and foster community at the same time?
Yeah, I think first of all, you have to talk about identity, right? And how everyone has kind of their own identity and what identity really is, and how we each have our own customs and religions and backgrounds and traditions that we bring to the table. And we're all so unique. That's what makes our classroom beautiful, is that everyone has all these different experiences and stories that they're going to be coming with that they can share, that's going to add a little bit more spice and variety to what we're doing here. And I think that's really important. And you want to start that with the little teeny tiny tots. And I think continue those conversations as the kids get older. But as they do get older, I know in my school, one of the things that we're really working on to really bring together and have a community is we do community circles. We just really started doing them just before the winter break. And I can already see the difference that they're making. So in our community circles, we've gone around, we have established some routines and expectations that we have of one another when we're in these circles. And it's amazing because, you know, I go into all these classrooms and do them, and pretty much all the expectations from classroom to classroom, even though they haven't talked to one another, they're all pretty much the same. Right? So they all will basically say, we want to be able to say whatever we need to say without being judged. We want to make sure that whatever we say here kind of stays in the room here and that it's confidential. We want to feel like people are giving us their attention and they're not like playing with stuff or doing other things while we're talking, because we really want to feel like we're respecting each other and that we're being respected when we're sharing. And they also will all pretty much say that passing is okay, and passing is actually still a form of participation. You know, just because maybe we're at a loss for words or we don't really feel comfortable doesn't mean that we're not a part of the community. It just means it's not our time to share right now. And that's okay too. And with the circles, you know, after you do that, you kind of just go around and you have your little feelings check in, usually like, tell us your high of the day or your low of the day, or something sweet and something sour. I kind of mix it up from class to class to give it a little variety. And then we just start our talk. So we've talked about teamwork and leadership, and even how we want to feel when we're working in the class with other kids. And some of those little tiny conversations really turn out to be some powerful conversations, really, because the kids start to think, wow, it really is kind of rude if I like scooch over in my chair if I'm sitting next to someone that I don't necessarily like, or I shouldn't roll my eyes at someone if I'm pulled to work with somebody, right? Because how many times have you seen that? I
Right.
can't work with him. Oh my
Right.
gosh, it's like the worst thing in the world. Oh my gosh. I might not make it to tomorrow if I have to
Oh
work
my
with them.
gosh.
So we just try to have these conversations so that there's more acceptance, and they really make the classroom so much more empathetic, which is nice.
Nice. Well, thank you, Carol, for sharing that with us. And we're going to go ahead and jump into our interview. All right, everyone. We are here at our interview section of the show. We have the wonderful Miss Carol Miller here with us. Carol, I am so happy to have you today. So, for those that may not know you and what you do, go ahead and give them a little bit of your background. Go ahead and spill the tea. What do you do, Carol?
Okay. Well, I am a school counselor, which means I deal with lots of behaviors, lots of emotions, and the occasional crier. I absolutely love what I do. I am in year 32. Um, and so, yay, I know it's a long time, but I have a undergraduate degree. I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology, and my master's is in school counseling. And yeah, I have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, 32 years. Yes. It's a, ooh. Uh, and I know that comes with a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience, but also a lot of care at the same time for the children, but also the teachers that you've come in contact with over the years. So that is the great part. With that being said, Carol, when you see teachers in the classroom for a variety of things, where do you see them going wrong, or where do you see them having trouble when it comes to classroom management?
That is a really great question. And for some of it, it doesn't matter whether you're in elementary school, middle school, or high school. One of the most common problems, I think, for any grade level is an educator's confidence in themselves, in trying to think, I have the skills that are needed to really manage these behaviors. Because there are sometimes kids, the behaviors that they're having can just drain on you. I'm thinking about some of the teachers that I work with now, like some really experienced teachers who are absolutely phenomenal, but they can be working with a kid, and that little pumpkin is just draining. Like they feel like, I'm doing all these things and I know I'm doing it right. But when they're not responding in the way that you want them to, or they're not making the progress that you really want them to have, you just feel like it's a personal attack. Like, I'm doing something wrong. I can't do this. I can't make the connection. And so a person's confidence really can get shaken. And so I think that's the number one thing when it comes to working with behaviors, is that you have to really understand that it's not you. It's just that maybe there's something else, or maybe it's something out of your control. Maybe the kid needs some medication, or maybe there's not follow through at home. So because there's not follow through at home, it's hard to have that consistency at school, because you're expecting to have this team with their parent and there isn't one. So I think that's the biggest thing. But
Right.
in terms of like the different age levels, I think in high school, it's more remembering that you have to regulate your own emotions before you can regulate the kids. Because sometimes there's this huge power struggle. You know, when a kid is 18, you expect them to know how to regulate their emotions and things, but they're hormonal.
Right.
They don't regulate their emotions.
Right.
That's why little kids, and they have these triggers. Their buttons are going to get pushed, and if you look at them the wrong way, that could just be their button being pushed. And
Mhm.
so you have to remember that there's a time and a place. And sometimes in the middle of class saying, "Why isn't your homework done?" That might not be the time or the place to ask that question. So it's making a connection and saying, "Hey, we have to talk about this later. Can you come and I'll find you on some time that maybe works best for you." Like just having those types of conversations can really change the dynamics, because kids don't like to be called out. And I know, having worked in high school, and I spent the bulk of my career at high school, so I've seen that a lot, where it's just that, they're coming head to head with one another, the teacher and the kid.
Right.
At middle school, it's more of the kid feels like they're at kind of at a lack of control. Like they don't control anything. They're dependent on everyone for everything. And so their needs are sometimes a little bit different. Um, But I think with all kids, still, we have to remember that even if they're in 12th grade, expectations from class to class differ. Expectations year to year differ. So if we want to have strong classroom management, we have to not only define our expectations, but we have to teach them. And they have to be explicitly taught, because kids don't automatically know. You assume that they should know by now, but they don't know if they haven't been taught. It's just like a bedtime routine. In some houses, it's wherever you drop with whatever you're wearing, that's bedtime. And for other families, it's like, nope, you're going to put your pajamas on, you're going to read you're going to brush your teeth, you're going to do this, electronics away, you're in bed. And for other families, there's like some spectrum in between. So expectations differ. So you have to remember to teach them. You also need some systems, right? Systems of management. Like, what are you going to do now that these expectations are taught? Do you have to have some sort of consequence? Or is there, and when I mean consequence, I don't mean like, ooh, you're in trouble, but if you haven't met the expectation, what are you going to do to make sure that you are meeting it the next time? Or how do you make like retribution if you hurt a peer, or you weren't kind, or you said something really mean? Like, how do you make it up to that person? So you have to kind of figure all those things out. And with little kids, sometimes I find that most behaviors occur in classrooms that are super busy. And when I mean super busy, I don't mean like just kids all over the place, but like stuff all over the walls, and, food happening all the time, or like you can't have constant snack time. I know it's nice, but you can't, because it leads to a little chaos. Once again, that goes back to systems, but sometimes kids are overstimulated. And so you have to think about how you can play that down a little bit.
Mhm. Very true. Hold that thought. So this is all good conversation. These are all great tips. But before we go any further, let's go ahead and take a break. Give everybody a chance to grab your water, get your snack, meditate on some of the things that have been said to you right now. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Don't go too far. See you soon. Are you a program director or thinking of starting a program? Maybe you need new curriculum that focuses on character development or technical skills. Maybe you need help establishing effective program logistics to have an impactful program culture. Or overall, you just need a program evaluation. Well, School After Hours Consulting is here to help. Contact us at schoolafterhours.com, and our contact information is in the show notes. Hope to hear from you soon. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. We have the wonderful Carol Miller here with us. She is an educational counselor. She's also a fellow podcaster, and she does all the wonderful things. And today we are talking about classroom management. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump right back into our conversation. And Carol, my next question for you is what are some fundamental need to knows when it comes to tips for implementing classroom management strategies for students?
Okay. Well, I think there's definitely some things to put into play. The first is to really define and teach your expectations. right? Kids have to know what's expected of them, and you have to really talk about them. You also have to really create systems. So you have to make sure that if this happens, this is what I want to happen. This is
Mhm.
how it's going to happen. And this is what we're going to do if it doesn't happen. You
Mm.
also need systems for maybe how your classroom is put together. Like, do you need a system for collecting papers? Do you need a system for when a kid leaves the room? Do you need a system for how they ask for help? Do you need a system for when they should ask if they can use the bathroom or not? Because, kids can say, I have to use the bathroom. But that gets really annoying if you're right in the middle of a sentence of critical instruction and they're like, I have to pee. Um, no, you don't. You can wait 30 seconds until we come to this part of our lesson, right? So it's about creating those systems. You also need, I think, some visuals because some kids really need to know something that's going to happen consistently. So I know when I go into a classroom, my kids pretty much know that the first thing is we're going to do some sort of like brain break warm up. I'm going to then introduce the lesson. We're going to have a warm up for that. Then we're going to get into the main part of our activity. We're going to have a discussion, and then I'm going to have some sort of like evaluative process, whether it's a thumbs up, thumbs down, or whatever. My kids also know that they can't ask to use the bathroom or get up or move until we're in like kind of the work part of the lesson where I'm going to ask them to do something, then I
Mhm.
might let them use the bathroom. But if I'm reading a story or something to start the lesson with, uh-uh, don't ask, don't look at me, don't say a word because you are going to get this. So you have to have those visuals. And so sometimes having the visuals is really helpful. Even I love when I go into classrooms and the teacher has like a red light, green light for when a kid can use the bathroom. So red light is critical instruction. Green light means you can get up and you can go. So visuals can be really great, as well as that schedule of here's what we're doing first, second, third, and fourth. Um, Another, I think, fundamental when it comes to implementing a system, a classroom management system, is to really develop those relationships with your kiddos and know what motivates them. One of the things that we use a lot is kind of like a motivational survey. So we're asking these kids, like, what excites you about school? Or what do you not like? Or what kinds of things kind of distract you?
Mhm.
And sometimes I'll do those individually with kiddos, but sometimes we do that as a whole class. And the information that we get from that is just really great because kids are pretty honest. They'll be like, well, whenever I sit by Johnny, I can't concentrate. That's my biggest distraction in class. So then you can look at it and say, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't put him by Johnny. But you have to develop those relationships to be able to ask those questions.
Right, which is very true. And I know that's something that we say repeatedly on the show is that it's important for you to know the child before you redirect the child for the reason of, you don't want them to take it as a hit to their, let me say, I don't want to say a hit to their ego, but you don't want to have it like damage who they are as a
Mhm.
person. And then they carry that and that creates emotional scars. Some of us still walk around with those things today, even as adults. But if you take the time to learn them and who they are, you're able to kind of engage with them the way that they can understand, like, hey, I need you to
Yeah,
do this.
exactly.
And they
I
know that
think
it's coming from a place of care and not from a place of judgment.
exactly. I think the other thing that you have to kind of ask yourself as an educator when you're working with a kid who maybe is having kind of a little meltdown, and you have to kind of ask, is the behavior interfering learning or is the behavior just annoying me?
Mm.
Because sometimes those are two different things. A kid could be having their meltdown, but quiet and under a table, and that could be bothersome to you, but it's not affecting everybody else, right? They're quiet, they're there. They might even still be engaged in what's going on, but they're just not doing what you want them to do, which is sitting at the desk, maybe with something in front of them, but they're there. So you kind of sometimes have to be a little bit flexible with your expectations for certain kids.
Right. Right. Very true. And that brings me to this concept that we talked about earlier when it comes to building relationships and knowing your students, but them also building relationships with kids around them in their class or even in their environment is the community circles that you mentioned. So, like to foster that awareness for not just your students, but also yourself as a facilitator, as a teacher, as the adult in the room. Like if someone wanted to start those community circles, how would they go about that process to make it part of their enrichment of the classroom?
I think you have to first kind of create a schedule for when you're going to offer these circles because they should be kind of routine. And for some classes, it's just not really developmentally appropriate for them, to sit and focus their attention for that long. But
Mm-hmm.
for the upper grades, it certainly is. And so, what we're going to do when we're having these circles, it's really part of a restorative justice program. And so, we are creating these circles. And when you do a circle, you have to really have time to rearrange your classroom
Mm-hmm.
because you are going to put yourself and everyone that's part of your class in a circle. And the way a true community circle is run, every person that's in that classroom has a space in the circle.
Mm-hmm.
So even if a kid is absent, you usually pull their chair in to represent them being there, even though they're not physically there at the moment. And I know when I'm doing SEL lessons, my teachers might leave the class, but during circle, they have to be a part of it because it's their classroom, their community, and they need to be a part of that. But you have the circle, and you do have a talking piece. And sometimes I'll ask the teacher if they have something that they want to use. We haven't been doing it that long, so I haven't started to ask the kids if one by one they want to bring in something that's a talking piece. But a talking piece is usually something that's kind of special to one person. And then you start the circle by sharing like what the talking piece is, why it was picked, and why it's special. And then you go around and usually everybody comments like, "Oh, I really liked your story about this talking piece," or "Wow, I was really interested in why you decided to share that with us." So you pass around the talking piece and then you're really just starting your conversations. So
Right.
there's lots of ways that you can run the circles, but it's really a chance to have everyone feel like they have a voice and that their voice is heard. So
Right.
they're really nice.
What I didn't get a chance to ask you was, what is a community circle and what's the purpose of a community circle?
Okay. So a community circle, it's actually tied to restorative processes and it comes from like indigenous cultures where they would come together as a community and have these circles within their own community. And so we've kind of stolen that idea and used it within schools or different people use them in different ways. But it's really a way to come together to build relationships, to build empathy and growth within really your classroom. So we call it a community circle because we're really trying to build that community within the class.
Right. Which brings me to my next question for you when it comes to social emotional learning, right? Because we want the students to be self-aware as well as socially aware. So my question is, how can educators use social emotional learning to help students be aware of their emotions in challenging moments?
I think, in social emotional learning, some schools don't have school counselors, and other schools do, and different schools use them in different ways. But you do, no matter what your school situation is, you want to try to incorporate social emotional learning because it really helps to build empathy, um, perseverance, and there's kind of a difference between social emotional learning and character ed because character ed, although they're used sometimes interchangeably, character ed, we're teaching values and we're teaching traits,
Mm,
but we're also teaching kids how we want them to behave using those character traits. Whereas social and emotional learning is you are really teaching problem solving and empathy to kids and helping them to really understand different perspectives. Like everyone has their own background, everyone has their own ideas, everyone has their own beliefs. But even though we might not all believe in the same thing, how can we treat people with respect? How can we problem solve through a conflict? And how can we resolve that peacefully? So it's giving the kids the ideas, but asking them to come up with their own solutions to the problems that they're facing.
Right. And how can that be used for them to then create coping skills for their students when they're starting to feel certain emotions?
Yeah. So I think you first have to teach like perspectives, like everyone has their own point of view. And then that kind of leads into empathy. So because we all have our own point of view, then we have to be able to um, also understand that we have to treat each other with kindness. And after we do that, we're kind of looking at, all right, we have these emotions. What do you do if someone's having these emotions? How do you support them? How do you maybe comfort them? How do you say, I'm sorry? And then you teach your coping skills. So it kind of like builds on one another,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to understand that perspective and that empathy piece before they can say, all right, we're having these emotions. What do we do about it?
Right.
And I think within that, you teach a little bit about how their brain works, and how their brain, when you're upset, kind of fly off the handle. I like to teach, it's called the hand model of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about the wise old owl who kind of, lives in your brain and helps you make really good decisions. But yet, in the center of your brain is the guard dog who guards all your emotions. And when your emotions are like out of control, your dog barks. And when your dog barks, your owl flies away. And when your owl flies away, now you're not thinking clearly, you're not being rational. And so, what do we need to do to calm our little guard dog down so that our owl flies back and we can make good decisions? So we kind of break it down that way with the kids, and you could use that example. There's like plenty of like YouTube videos, the video on that. Just Google hand model of the brain, and a million things will pop up. And it doesn't matter whether they're really little or super big or the smelly ones kind of in between, those middle schoolers, they all kind of get it. Like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
And I think once you do that, then you can understand, like, well, then why do we have emotions? Because
Exactly.
they protect us. Our emotions are telling us something. When we feel happy, it's because our emotions are showing people that we enjoy this or we really like it. And when we're sad, it's showing us maybe what we're missing or something's not quite right. And when
Mm-hmm.
we're angry, it's for this other reason. Or
Right.
when we're scared, it's because we want to protect ourselves. So our emotions have a role, they have a job. And then once we do that, then we could say, well, how do we calm down? And what are ways that we do that? And then you
Yeah.
practice those things so that when their owl flies away and their guard dog is barking, the kids know what to do.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Carol, for sharing those tidbits with us and being here with us today. But before we go, we're going to go ahead and jump into our Professionals Lounge. Professionals Lounge is a segment of the show that allows guests to share advice with other practitioners in the OST and youth development field about how they can begin growing their gifts and talents, but also develop themselves as professionals in the field. Here's our Professionals Lounge conversation. All right, everyone, we've made it to the end of our show. I know that you all have had a great time, but before we go, we're going to go ahead and do our Professionals Lounge. So, Carol, this is my Professionals Lounge question for you. What resources can you recommend to educators to help them with their students when they engage with them, but also help them with their classroom management?
I don't even know where to begin because there are so many things that I can give you to share. I do have one thing. We talked a lot about community circles. And
Mhm.
so the book that we use and we were trained with is called Circle Forward. And you can
Mhm.
just go to Amazon or wherever for that. But it's a really fantastic book and it has tons and tons of community circle prompts. when the whole beginning of the book tells you this is like how you run a circle, these are the steps, these are questions to ask. This is like what you do to start it, to in the middle of it, and to end it with. So I truly recommend that book. It's really good. In terms of other things, in my TPT store, I have this one thing that's called Think Sheets, and it's
Mm-hmm.
also part of the restorative process. So it goes through the steps like, oh, I had this behavior that maybe I like to call them unexpected behaviors rather than like a misbehavior or bad behavior. But I had this unexpected behavior that really did some damage, whether it was like it took time away from me, like I lost a privilege, or it hurt my classroom mates because maybe they had to be removed to another room and so they lost instruction time, or maybe I just made the teacher sad or they're a little angry with me right now. But it walks them through all the steps and it asks them, like, well, what were you thinking
Mm-hmm.
before the event happened? You know, what feelings were you having? And so you can kind of see like where they're coming from and maybe why they did what they did. I was mad at so and so from lunchtime or recess because they were calling me names.
Right.
And so now you asked me to work with him. So of course I didn't want to. And I said no, and I stormed out.
Right.
You know, so you can kind of work backwards and find out what the reasons were.
Right.
But
Like,
then
oh,
it,
that happened.
yeah, like, oh, there you go. But then it will walk them through like, what are the next steps? Well, now that this happened, what do you have to do? Do you have to
Mm-hmm.
apologize? Do you have to clean up a mess? Do you have to do this or that? And then it kind of like circles it around so that you find some resolve to the whole situation.
Right.
So I think that's a good way to practice putting things back in order once something takes it out of order, makes it
Right.
kind of a mess. So I think that's a good thing to have. In terms of other things, you know, if you want to learn more about the brain and the hand model of the brain, it's a really good, I think, system for kids because they understand it. They get the visuals of like you totally use your hand to describe like the brain and the parts of the brain and what those parts of the brain do and why they're so important. And so I have a couple things on the hand model of the brain in my TPT store, but you could also really easily go online, like I said, to like YouTube and find some awesome videos about the hand model of the brain. And I think those are helpful things to have too. And if you
Mhm.
don't mind, I do have a freebie that I usually just put on my blog about, you know, the little student survey. So, like, I
Uh-huh.
have a student survey and some, we call it a forced choice reward survey. I didn't talk about that, but it just kind of is like if you were to do like a behavior plan with a kid, like what types of things motivate them. And so I can share it, like I'll give you the links for that and so that you can share it with people. And it's free. It's like, you know, they just kind of hit the button and download it. So
Please
they'll
do.
love it.
Yes. Please do. We would love them. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Carol, for being here with us today. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you to learn a little bit more about what you do, or even, contract you out to do some learning or help them with their classroom management or services, go ahead and tell them how they can reach you.
Okay. Well, you can find me mostly on Facebook. I have several really large Facebook groups for school counselors, elementary school counselor exchange, caught in the middle school counselors, or high school counselor connection. So you can find me in one of those groups, as well as just Carol Miller Counseling Essentials on both Facebook and on Instagram. On Instagram, it's just Counseling Essentials, but you can find me there.
Awesome. Don't forget the podcast. Don't forget the
Oh,
podcast.
and the podcast. Oh, yeah. Come listen to us because we're kind of cool over there. It's the Counselor Chat podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. And everyone, that is the end of our show. Please like, subscribe, but also share us so this wonderful information could be spread around and we could also get some more listeners for our show. Thank you for your time and thank you for being here with us. Until we meet next time. Bye.
Bye.
Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of our show. If you liked what you heard and you enjoyed our conversation, make sure that you're following us on YouTube, but also hit that like button so we know what you are enjoying. You can also find us on other podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts if you want to listen to our audio version as well. To get more behind the scenes stuff, make sure that you're following us on our social media accounts, Instagram and Facebook at School After Hours. Well, that's all I have for today. In the words of Mr. Arthur Ashe, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Until next time, y'all. Bye-bye.